All right, let's get right into it. We're going to take a journey back to a moment in history, a moment when an entire country was teetering on the edge of a full blown civil war. But somehow they chose a different path. It was a transformation, not through fighting, but through talking, through negotiation, and, well, through an almost unbelievable leap of faith. I really want you to just picture a room. Inside that room, you have the oppressor and the oppressed, sitting face to face. I was actually there, in that room, where we, people who were historical enemies, had to somehow figure out how to build a future together. I gotta tell you, it was not a given. It wasn't easy. It felt, frankly, almost impossible. You see, our starting point wasn't some kind of clean slate. It was a canvas that was just stained with decades of really brutal oppression, a system we called apartheid. This sign you see here, this wasn't some artifact from a history book. This was everyday life. It was a constant thread of violence just woven into the very fabric of our society. You know, it's almost jarring to read a clinical definition like that for something that was so completely inhumane. Apartheid wasn't just about separation. It was a whole legal and political architecture designed to dehumanize people. It literally divided everyone by the color of their skin, treating the black majority, and we're talking about 3/4 of the population, as if they were inferiors in the land of their own birth. I mean, just look at this image. It really captures the absurdity and the cruelty of the whole thing. A beautiful, natural beach declared off limits just because of someone's race. The non-white population had absolutely no voting rights. They were forbidden from even living in so-called white areas without a special permit. Every single part of life was controlled and segregated. So you can imagine, when we finally came to the negotiating table, after decades of struggle and so much sacrifice, trust? There was zero trust between us. We weren't just political opponents. We were people who were defined by our deepest, darkest fears of one another. And this slide really lays out the massive chasm between us. On our side, the black majority, we wanted justice. And not just the right to vote, that basic one person, one vote principle, but a complete overhaul of society. We're talking about access to the land that had been stolen, access to decent housing in cities we've been barred from, access to the quality education and healthcare that had been denied to us for generations. And for the white minority, their fear was losing everything. Their property, their economic advantages, pretty much their entire way of life. The deadlock, it just seemed absolutely unbreakable. I mean, how could the oppressed possibly trust the oppressor? And how could the oppressor ever truly let go of power? And then, a truly radical choice was made. We chose not to seek revenge, but to do something much, much harder. Our leader, Nelson Mandela, a man who had every single reason to be filled with bitterness after spending 27 years in prison, he was the one who guided us toward this incredible leap of faith. He asked us to see the humanity in our enemies, to actually believe that a shared future was possible. And this right here, this became the absolute foundation of our new democracy, forgiveness. Now, it wasn't about forgetting what happened. No way. It was about making a conscious decision that the future would not be held prisoner by the past. It was a plea to believe that we could actually share this country. So, with forgiveness as our guide, our North Star, we began the really difficult, practical work of turning that incredibly fragile trust into a solid set of unbreakable rules for our new nation. And this just brilliantly shows you the core of the compromise. It was like a grand bargain. The white minority agreed to majority rule and basic rights for everyone. In return, we, the black majority, agreed that our power wouldn't be absolute. We built in protections for minority cultures and languages, and, this was huge, we guaranteed we would not just seize the property of the white minority. You see? Each side gave up its biggest weapon to help calm the other side's biggest fear. And out of this compromise, the idea of the Rainbow Nation was born, a country that, as our Constitution says, belongs to all who live in it, black and white. Nobody was going to be treated like a demon. Everyone, no matter their past, had to be part of the solution. Now, this path of ours, forging a shared vision from scratch, it's especially striking when you compare it to the journey of another great democracy, India, which was also born out of a long struggle against colonial rule. And right here, you see the fundamental difference in our starting points. You see, India's freedom movement over many, many decades had already built a broad agreement on what the values of a future democratic state should be. You know, things like justice, liberty, and equality. Now, this is not to say India's path was easy. Far from it. The country was born in the midst of the absolute horror of partition. But even with all that trauma, the basic idea of a secular, democratic India was a consensus that had been built over a long, long struggle. We, on the other hand, we had none of that shared history to draw from. We had to create that shared dream in the very same room where we were sitting as enemies. It was like we were trying to build the ship while we were already at sea in the middle of a storm. So, when it all comes down to it, what does this document we created, our Constitution, what does it really represent for us today, and maybe for the rest of the world? It's so much more than just a set of laws. It is a promise. It's a solemn pact that we made to each other, looking back at our history to say, never again. We will never ever go back to that brutal past. But, and this is just as important, it also looks forward. It's a charter, a blueprint for transforming our country into the equal and just society that we are still working every single day to build. A nation that is truly shared by all of its people. Our story offers one possible answer. It's a difficult path for sure, but it's a hopeful one. And it all began with choosing to see the potential for good, even in our enemies. It required both sides to step back from the brink, and instead of fighting for total victory, to decide to build a shared home.